Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and I must say that originally I was asked to come and replace Ginny Flood. I had to laugh because Ginny was my Director General with the federal government just a little over a year ago, and I sort of thought it was interesting that even though, despite the fact she's not my boss anymore, she still found a way to delegate her task to me. But that said, it is indeed a pleasure for me to be here amongst you and this distinguished audience, and to give you and to share with you some of my perspectives on the role of mining, the role that mining can play in development, economic development, and sustainable economic development, and to share with you some of the benefits of the lessons learned that we've had here in Canada and how we're working with our partners in Africa to share some of that experience and to impart some of that expertise and knowledge to those who are seeking that same kind of information. There's been a lot said about you know, the growth in demand and the need for these mineral resources, and that countries really want economic development. And I think for us, we've been able to demonstrate in countries like Canada, and there are other countries around the world, that following a strategy of mineral and natural resource development can lead to good outcomes. It doesn't necessarily have to be a situation where you have continuous poverty or you have continuous challenges associated with this particular sector. But you have to get the recipe right. You have to get the right elements brought together, and that really requires a good institutional base, good capacity base. And when I mean capacity, it's not just knowing what needs to be done. I mean, we talk to our African counterparts on a regular basis, and they tell us, and I can attest to the fact that there's some very talented and very competent individuals within the mines ministries in many of these countries. They know how to write good mining legislation. They've been able to put together good mining laws and good processes in place. Where the challenge is operationalizing it and having in place the institutional capacity and the institutional frameworks to deliver those frameworks and to make them really work. To be able to have the people in place within the institutions who can go through and read the complex environmental assessment reports and understand what those implications are for any particular mine or resources being developed. It's having the capacity to put in place good public geoscience programs. It's having even just having a cadastre system so that you can identify who owns what and who is coming into what area and how's that going to be administered. It's not very flashy. It's not very. It's not the sort of thing that makes announceables on a day-to-day basis. It's the grinding work that goes on behind the scenes within government institutions to make sure that what needs to be done is being done, that it's being enforced, and that it's being monitored, and that it's being continuously improved over time. So we don't need to have poor outcomes. We don't need to have issues of environmental legacies or messes that we have to clean up afterwards. We know what needs to be done. We just need to be able to put in place those institutional capacities to be able to deliver it. So we want to break that cycle. We want to get away from the legacy of the past. We know that industry has a strong role to play in this, but they can't do it alone. There is a role for governments. At the end of the day, it's the governments that set the agenda. They set the rules of engagement within any particular national jurisdiction. So how do we move to sustainable benefits? And again, I would argue that we've had a lot of talk about the mine, the mineral resource, the commodity, and I look at it from a geological perspective. I'm a former exploration geologist. I've worked for juniors, I've worked for majors, I've worked for geological surveys before I worked for the federal government. And when I look at mine resource and mine development, I think a lot of people seem to think that a mine is a fixed asset that you just have to go in and dig up and sell to whomever is looking for that particular commodity. But it's much more complex than that. Mother Nature isn't that kind to us, and it doesn't, the mineral emplacement isn't just such a neat package. It's as much, if not more so, an economic deposit as it is a physical deposit. Its whole size, its whole capacity to be able to be developed and mined over time, and we're talking 10, 15, sometimes 25-year time frames, is constrained by the economics of that deposit. The more pressures you put on the economics of that deposit, either through increased costs, increased demands in terms of taxes and royalties, in terms of if all of a sudden the prices are lower, it will expand or shrink the size of that deposit and really determine the sustainability of that deposit over time to provide the benefits that countries and citizens are looking for. So we need to look at it more from a perspective of the activity around mining as opposed to simply the resource rent that you can extract from any given deposit. I mean, I worked for a company at one time, and each and every deposit has to stand on the merits of the economics of that project. A project in one country, in a company, is not going to be subsidizing the profitability or the ability of that mine to sustain itself over time in another. It doesn't work that way. Each company looks at it in terms of each project has to stand on its own merits. And so the differences between jurisdictions, the differences in terms of the geology of the deposit, the ability to extract it at a return on the investment really is determined by the characteristics of that one deposit. So it's more than just talking about the taxes and royalties you can derive. It's about the wages and the benefits that come to the employees within the mine. It's about the long-term purchase of goods and services. Mines are built, yes, but over the time they still need materials, they still need goods, they still need services to keep that mine running over its 25 or 30-year lifespan. So how do countries, how do communities tap into that capacity, that opportunity to play with the companies? It's all about procurement policies. Do companies buy local goods and services? Do they buy regional goods and services? And in many ways, if you look at one thing we haven't done very well is be able to articulate this, but anecdotally we know that most mines and most mining activity will seek out those opportunities locally as much as possible. We need good transparency, we need good accountability, but it's not simply enough. That's only one element of overall good governance. We need to be able to manage this sector from start to end, from exploration to mine closure, and I'll talk a little bit about a process that we've developed to address those issues. We've had some discussion earlier about, what is Canada's footprint, what is our investment abroad as Canadians and Canadian companies. This is a chart that uses a methodology that was developed by a colleague of mine who has since retired, but I think is sitting here in the room, Michel Miron. This is the summary of his work to try to really get a good handle on what are Canada's assets abroad. And he used a methodology using the annual reports of Canadian companies, saying what are their assets, what are the assets that they hold in these countries. And so this is the figure from 2011, because the 2012 annual reports are still just coming out and we haven't done the analysis yet. But you can see here that we're pretty well everywhere. We're heavily invested, Canadian companies are heavily invested in the Americas. It's growing in Africa. I think what's important is not so much the numbers on this, but the fact that through this mineral investment and through this activity of Canadian exploration companies, in many cases, the level of investment as it rises, we see an increased pressure on us to institutionalize these relationships, if you like, to negotiate foreign investment protection agreements, which then lead to the development of free trade agreements. I mean, we've seen that in a couple of instances where, in fact, as a result of a lot of the investment into Chile and other parts of Latin America, we have since seen the development of free trade agreements with those countries. So it not only is about the mining and the extraction of the mineral resource, but there's also a relationship of two-way trade in terms of goods and services to support the mining industry, but then it also develops over time into other opportunities in other areas of the economy. This just gets into a little bit more specifics. Again, this is still based on that same methodology of the assets that are held by Canadian companies. As you can see how it has been growing over time. We're up around $32 billion now. I think we heard this morning from Mr. Shapiro about the distribution of where those assets are held. And it's interesting, you look at them, that they're not just held all in gold or in one commodity, but there are interests in nickel in Madagascar, you have copper interests in Zambia, you have gold and platinum group metals and other metals in South Africa. You know, so it's right across the board, and it's in a range of different commodities. We do have a lot of common interests with governments in Africa, and we've been working with them to address the issues of good governance and transparency. We've been talking about how do you get it right in terms of the distribution of the benefits. I mean, it's a real challenge for some countries where they say, yes, we've had a $300, $400, $500 billion investment in one particular region, but those benefits have to somehow accrue to the national interest as well, so that other parts of the country can benefit from this resource development. It's not all just about the local community. It's also about how does the wealth that's generated from this activity help to contribute towards broader education or health or other institutional requirements that the countries face. We talk about environmental protection, and that's certainly an important consideration as well. You want to make sure that you have planning for long-term protection of the environment, and that to make sure that you're using the best practices and the best technologies available. We do work in sharing best practice in those areas on innovation and on technology and on policy. We cooperate on market access issues where we have common interests. If we see particular jurisdictions putting up restrictions on the movement of materials or goods, we do work with these countries where we have a common interest. And we have been sharing with them our approach to encouraging companies to follow good corporate social responsibility practices. We're a long-time partner in Africa. We've been there working with African countries over a long period of time. We were probably one of the first countries to work very closely through the African Mining Partnership, which was something we did at the annual mining in Daba every year, where African countries were coming together to try to talk about some of these policy issues and policy challenges and what were the best techniques to overcome them. We worked through the opportunity of the World Summit on Sustainable Development that was held in Johannesburg in 2002 to start changing that conversation around mining and looking to see how can we start talking about what the potential benefits are and the mechanisms that we have in place to address some of the challenges. And we established something called a Global Dialogue, which was a joint venture between Canada and South Africa to establish a voluntary partnership, which then eventually became the Intergovernmental Forum on Mining, Minerals and Metals and Sustainable Development in 2005. So we worked closely with the African Mining Partnership. We've worked closely through the Intergovernmental Forum process. We developed a mining policy framework that I'm going to share with you in a minute. We've also seen other aspects, other elements of the government building new institutions that will work with countries to help build their development and their institutional capacity through things like the Canadian International Institute for Extractive Industries and Development, and also the financial assistance that we're providing to the African Mineral Development Center. The Intergovernmental Forum is really something that I've been very closely involved with for quite some time now. A number of us at NRCan had the idea that we needed to do something to build this governance capacity, this information sharing process, and it was through that initiative with South Africa at the World Summit to develop this voluntary partnership of governments that brings mining ministries together. It's not other players. We bring other institutions in to help inform us on some of these issues when it's required. But it's the only forum that exists in the world that brings mining ministries together to work on mining ministry issues and challenges. And we're looking to how can we enhance and promote the sustainable contribution from mineral resource development. Our biggest, I'd say more than half the countries that belong to this voluntary partnership come from Africa. I think I've got 24 of the 45 that are members. Canada hosts the Secretariat. It's now hosted in CEDA, and we work very closely with CEDA in the development of the agendas and the work of the forum. But the key to the work that we've done was to develop a mining policy framework. This was developed by mining ministries for use of mining ministries. And it really represents a compendium of best practice right through the entire life cycle, from mineral exploration through to mine closure. We took this mining policy framework after we had done a number of targeted workshops over I'd say a 4-year period where we looked in more detail on what is best practice in terms of setting royalty regimes and tax rates. What are the best practices in terms of environmental assessment work, and how do you do a good environmental assessment? At what point do you engage community stakeholders and have that dialogue around what essentially at the end of the day is really what we're talking about is good land use planning. And again, where do we put in place policies and activities to enhance the contribution of mining to sustainable development? So we've took this broader view, we put it together in a compendium. We included things like, you know, do you put a bond in and for mine closure? How do you do good rehabilitation programs? And we put it all together, not as something prescriptive to tell countries how to do it specifically, but as a tool that they can use to help design their policy regimes, their mining regimes, and adapt them for their national circumstances. So it was really a bottom-up approach rather than a prescriptive telling people how to do it. And so countries take from it what they need. We had a very good presentation last year from Tanzania in terms of how they matched their new mining regime, their mining legislation against all the elements of the policy framework, and they were able to demonstrate how certain aspects of the framework helped inform them and to make them think about things that perhaps they hadn't thought about originally, such as how to plan for posting bonds for mine closure and rehabilitation, how to do community consultation when you're going through environmental assessment processes. So it was very, very, very handy that way. My last slide, really, I think I just want to reinforce the message that Canada continues to work with our partners, both on a multilateral basis and on a bilateral basis. Quite often we get requests from countries to help them with very specific elements of their mining policy regimes. And we will continue to work through these mechanisms as we move forward to address these issues of common interest. So with that, I'll say thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions later on in the panel.